Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. This episode comes to you from Inspire 2017 in Washington, D.C. We caught up with Linda Rose, who recently sold her business, RoseASP, to private equity firm ESW Capital. It wasn't Linda's first business sale, but she says it was different from previous deals, and it sparked a different type of question coming from other business owners in the Microsoft channel interested in the value of their companies. Linda tells us about the questions she's been fielding. She tells us about the economics of today's channel opportunity and the efforts of Microsoft and others in the channel to support women in executive leadership roles at technology companies. All right, my guest is Linda Rose. We're here at Inspire 2017 in lovely, muggy Washington, D.C. today. And Linda, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting time for you. And what we really wanted to talk about today was, what's been happening with your business and your professional situation and your future plans. RoseASP obviously was your business, and you've sold it recently. So wanted to learn more about what that's really meant for you, what you've seen in response. So why don't we maybe start from the beginning? What can you tell us about the actual sale of your business and where things have gone from there?
Well, I actually really think it starts probably back a year ago, exactly at this event. I really made a decision then, given everything that I was doing and how well our company was doing, that it was probably a good time to potentially look at folks that might be interested in acquiring us. So I do exactly remember the seat I was at this event where I'm like, you know what, I think it's time. And so wow. I began that process shortly thereafter. And for me, it was about an 8-month process, which I'm happy to get into the details on that. But it culminated in a sale to a firm really outside of the ecosystem. And that was something that was important to me as well. I didn't just want to look within the Dynamics community or the Microsoft community, but I really wanted to look at people outside of that community because, as I've written in some of my blogs, Microsoft is hot again. It's a sexy product. I think Satya has done a lot to highlight where this company is going and the diversity in this company. And so people from the outside want to get in. And that's what I found as I was going through my process of looking at potential buyers.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think Microsoft looks favorably on that too. I think at least one Microsoft person yesterday said that they see it as a real sign of strength that there are deals happening. Yours as an example, and others too. So I think they like that there's interest in that other companies see value in businesses that invest in Dynamics or that make Dynamics part of their practice.
Yes, and what I was really seeing a lot of is folks that maybe owned a managed service provider, like private equity firms, basically, that owned a certain type of company and wanted to marry it with another type of company, whereas I was completely focused on ERP hosting across multiple products. But to marry that up with a group that was doing Office 365 or managed services, and that way you can cross-sell to those customer bases, that seemed to be the most appealing sort of buyer.
Okay.
And that's who I appeal to the most as well. So I saw a lot of that. Kind of surprising, but then again, not.
Right, yeah. It certainly, I've had inquiries from private equity firms because they're basically scouring the Microsoft partner channel, looking for different good opportunities. And, there's sort of a short list of companies that are good candidates for it. Now, maybe going back to what you said about the process and your sort of planning on finding a sale or an exit of some sort, how sort of formal would you say you kept yourself organized in pursuing this kind of a deal? Because I know we'll get into this a little more, but it definitely, I think there are a lot of firms a lot of business owners who are thinking about exits at some time in the future, right? So I think they're curious about all sorts of elements of what your experience was.
So again, for me, I thought that the largest valuation would come from outside the channel for those people who really wanted to get in. So I, over the year, really prior year had been pinged by a number of business brokers, and just started having conversations with folks, trying to understand really who understood this space versus who was just looking to do another deal. And I settled on a group called IT ExchangeNet, and I'd been speaking with them for a bit, just had casual conversations,
Right.
and felt that they really understood the space. And so I then went into a formal agreement with them to actually start looking for buyers. And that process actually went quite quickly. There was a profile that they put together on our organization, talked about our revenue, over the number of years, as well as our EBITDA, our reoccurring revenue, our churn rate. All of that was incredibly important to buyers. And so we went through that fairly quickly because I had pretty much my accounting in order. And then we went out, and within probably 6 weeks, we had 15 to 18 people that were interested in actually taking a look at us.
Wow.
Right. And so really between August, when we started the process, by the time the holidays rolled around, Thanksgiving, I pretty much kind of had it narrowed down to 3. And before the Christmas break, I had it narrowed down to 1. And formally, signed up with an LOI, in which case, in this particular LOI, I couldn't negotiate with anybody else. I was sort of locked into these folks for about 60 days. And so it went hot and heavy after the holidays. We all took a break, re-energized ourselves, and then pretty much went heads down on legal documents from January to March. And that took a lot longer than I expected.
Yeah.
And it was pretty taxing, actually.
I was going to ask, does that take away from any other... was it hard to concentrate on other elements of, of running the business?
Absolutely. And until the deal was done or felt like we were at 90%, I really didn't want to bring my team in and explain to them what was happening, because if it fell apart, I didn't want to unnerve them. I didn't want to distract from their focus on continuing to grow the business and service our client base and that sort of thing. So when we got to the very end, or close to the end, I enlisted my management team and let them know what was going on, and really asked for their approval as well to make sure that they were happy with the buyer. I just didn't want to drop it in their lap, but I wanted to get their consensus as well that it was the right direction for the company.
Yeah,
knowing that I was going to exit very shortly.
Yeah, I can imagine that finding the right time to inform the rest of the team would be a sensitive point.
But all up, took me about 8 months from start to finish.
Yeah. It sounds like you said August. So if WPC last year was a starting point, you really started to move after that. Did you? I know you said you obviously it makes sense that you had sort of financial picture in order. But did the process teach you anything about either things you didn't think about your own business, or things about the way other people evaluate you from the outside that you weren't expecting?
I think I had some pretty good guidance in terms of having the right metrics to report on. I'd gotten some guidance from some larger equity firms that were kind of my mentors, so to speak. And so over the years, and I've had RoseASP for 16 years, so over the years I've sort of touched base with them, knowing what my gross profit should be, knowing what I should keep my churn rate at, those sort of metrics that I knew were going to be important for future buyers. So I pretty much had that in order. I think what kind of blew me away a little bit was the exhaustive list of due diligence documents. It was way beyond what I had done in an earlier sale of Rose Business Solutions to Armanino. This was pretty intense. I think partially because it was a stock sale versus an asset sale, and they look at a lot more things. And I had to pull together minutes from years ago, and just
Wow.
I had partners in the earlier years, and to really be able to validate that they were no longer shareholders and things like that. So I had to go back a few years, which took a little time.
Right. Those are the kind of the details that people I think dread trying to go back and find if in those scenarios, right? If they haven't done a good job of keeping them organized.
And then I still had multiple entities, so there was a little intercompany going on between our multiple entities. So really making sure that was very clean and could show both sides of the transaction.
Okay.
So there was quite a bit involved in the due diligence. Very distracting, actually. for me
I
and the
bet.
business. Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. And as you mentioned, this was not the first business you've sold, but it was a different style.
Very different.
deal.
Yeah. This is actually the fourth company I've sold, but they've all been very different.
Each
different
transaction was
buyers.
very unique.
Every transaction very different. A life of its own.
Okay. So moving kind of to the point where it became news publicly known that the deal was happening. That changed. I guess sparked a lot of new conversations for you, right? You started hearing from other partners who.
Yes, the outreach from partners was really surprising and overwhelming to some extent, both on LinkedIn and personally. I just got so many emails once the announcement was made, and folks really that know me pretty well over the years said, hey, can you give me a little advice? I'm kind of at that point as well where I'm kind of poking my head up, want to take a look at maybe exiting or getting some money out for all the efforts that I've put in. I'll stick around, but I'd like to maybe cash out a little bit. And so, my non-compete was pretty intense in terms of what I'm able to do and not able to do going forward. So I thought the best way to really get that information out was to write some blog posts, which actually has led now to me deciding to write a book. So I'm actually going to write a book on creating companies, selling companies, that sort of thing, and in the technology space, specifically within, the Microsoft community and the VAR and ISV channel and MSP channel.
Exciting. So in case you were wondering where you're going to spend your time now.
That is going to be my fall. Take a little time off, but that will be my fall.
When you talk about non-compete, do you think companies were looking to get to get advice from you, or
everybody wants to know valuations? That's really the big question. And I've been to enough Microsoft events where there's been a number, there's valuations that are thrown out. And of course, Microsoft has been preaching reoccurring revenue. That's just their mantra. And there's been a couple occasions where I've heard some, 21 times EBITDA numbers, and I'm like, come on, people, that can't be real. And so, being a numbers person and accountant I just, go and investigate that sort of stuff. And, I think for companies, and there are really 4 different categories of partners in this ecosystem. And I think for those who have created their own IP, have their own product, are not reliant on Microsoft's changes or anything, it's really, truly their product, something like that could potentially get 18 to 21 times EBITDA. But there's very few of those people in this ecosystem that really truly have a full standalone product, has nothing to do with, it's not embedded in the ERP system, but it's truly their own product, right? There you can get the highest type of multiples. But there's, it goes from that to, basically your traditional VAR that's still majority of its consulting, very little product revenue anymore. That can't be considered reoccurring, so there's virtually no reoccurring revenue. And that's going to provide the lowest multiple. And then you have, a couple of, categories in between that. And so I did some investigation and talked to some folks that had sold in the past who were willing to expose that information to me as well, and put together a chart of here's where I think it sits. Here's what your top line multiple is going to be, and here's what your EBITDA multiple is going to be. And I threw it out on a post and let people absorb that information to give them some sense of where things are headed. Now, of course, there's always going to be those transactions that are sort of outside the norm. We see them all the time. We look at it and go, oh my God, they got that much money. Well, good on them. So there are anomalies to that as well.
And do you think business? I'm gonna have to post a link to that piece. Was it like a LinkedIn article?
Right. Yes.
So we'll post
about
a link
multiples.
to that. Around
Absolutely.
multiples. That's always an interesting a topic of interest, I know. But do you think partners have this is a conversation that's been going on for a couple of years. I know, especially with the Dynamics products as they've shifted as the Dynamics 365 was introduced. VARs who focused on the older products. The question is, what does that do to the value of their companies if they don't transition? Do you think partners have a good perception of where they are at personally? Like if they're talking to you and saying, "Oh, I'm thinking about, like you said, taking cash out." Do you think they have the right expectations?
No, not necessarily. Okay. I think there's quite a few people that said, hey, I think I can get 2 to 3 times top level, revenue. And I'm like, no, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, you to try to tell them that gently, but maybe 3 to 4 times EBITDA, but certainly
Okay.
not 2 to 3 times top level as a traditional VAR, right?
Yeah,
So making
yeah.
that transition to reoccurring revenue, and that's, I mean, we were at 98% reoccurring revenue, which is huge,
Right.
right? And that sort of garnered a ton of attention on the company, and I had
Sure.
obviously a number of options there. But, unless you're in the business that I was in, that's really hard to accomplish because we did absolutely no consulting at all. It was all the monthly
Right.
billings,
That's
right?
part of when you had done
Exactly.
other deals
So
in the past.
it also allowed me just to basically leave, right,
Mm-hmm.
and walk out the door because they knew that even if I left, the customers were still under contract and they were still going to pay their monthly hosting fees. And so there's a lot of comfort to the buyer that revenue was going to continue on.
Yeah.
When there are large owners like myself who just, their names on the door and that kind of stuff, when they walk out the door, buyers are a little concerned, or are the customers going to walk out the door as well? Because customers can go wherever they want.
Sure.
And so, having them locked into contracts and having them in sort of that reoccurring revenue mode gives those buyers comfort. So the higher that reoccurring revenue number is, the higher your valuation is going to be, absolutely unequivocally. And the more IP that you have that's your own
Yeah.
creates even a higher multiple.
Yeah, I mean, I have to think. One of the impressions I have from this year's Inspire event that we're at right now is, I think Microsoft is encouraging a lot of those same values. I think they're trying to push partners toward embracing some of those characteristics in what their businesses look like. Do you agree that they're sort of pushing in that direction?
Yes, and one of the questions that I was asked by one partner was, if you were going to do it all over again, what would you do this time? And there was no hesitancy in my answer, and that is, you know what? I'd create some apps on AppSource and sit back and let those babies pump out the monthly revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously have a team behind that would support those apps, but ingrain it into CRM, into ERP. But that is really, I think, where the valuation is going forward. Again, it's your own IP. You don't have any Azure costs. The Azure costs are basically incurred by the customer because you're embedding them into that. And so it's truly your product that's being sold, and the gross profit on that is going to be the highest.
Okay. Yeah. And I like the idea of the ISV embed, if I'm getting the term right, of that sort of new program that I think is trying to push further into, I think encouraging people to build apps and to use Microsoft technology underneath for foundational stuff. I think that's a smart way for Microsoft to try to push more.
But I think partners
more
are really
vendors.
struggling with how to price those apps.
Okay.
Right? That's really, I think, where a lot of confusion is today, because you really can't even go back to the subscription model, right? So, back in the day, people call me up and say, we're an ISV, we've always sold perpetual licenses. Can you give us some guidance around subscription?
Yeah.
And my response always was that, take the product, take 3 years worth of it, the purchase price originally plus 2-3 years worth of maintenance, take that number, divide it anywhere between 42 and 36 months, and that's kind of your subscription number. Well, you can't really do that anymore, because with a Microsoft product coming out at, $50 on the SMB side and $200 on the enterprise side, you can't outprice that, right? So it almost gives you your high to extent if you're pricing per user. Right. If you're pricing by company, it's different.
Yeah.
But it tampers a little bit the price that you can charge as well for your product. And I think partners who can start out their product free, and then maybe do some add-ons to it, I think are going to be the most successful partners in this app community.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I think I don't have a great sense of who is really succeeding in that new model yet in AppSource. I think Microsoft's going to hold up some examples of those, but I'm not quite seeing them yet. So that will be interesting to. I know what they love is verticalization, and whether that's AppSource or whether it's just great expertise. I think both Microsoft and buyers, I think, also really like that.
Absolutely.
As partner. Attractive businesses. So there was one other topic I think we wanted to kind of touch on here before we still have a little time. So you've done, I think, a lot of thinking about your role as a woman in business and sort of as a mentor to other women in maybe the Microsoft channel in particular. Are you working in any particular way on that right now?
Yes, I am big on encouraging women leaders in this ecosystem. I mean, there's truly so few of us that run organizations that are truly, managing large entities or part of the leadership team, and I'm really encouraging more of that. And the book that I'm going to write is going to have a bent on women in technology and just really encouraging them to strive for those roles. Because, I do believe, and I think it was mentioned yesterday in a keynote, that, bringing a woman into a leadership team does sort of add a different level of dynamic to it. And I think that's important. And I was really encouraged yesterday at Monday's keynote to see that all the presenters, other than Satya and Ron, were all female. And that was really nice to see. That's the first time that we've ever seen that. And I think that's a good sign of where Microsoft is headed to, and they're thinking in terms of diversity within their company. And I'm encouraged about some of the other larger entities, such as Tribridge, are really encouraging that as well. And so there's a place for us, but there are so few of us truly in this ecosystem. I mean, I can countless amount of times being on PAC meetings and just being in the room and being virtually the only female business owner in the room. So now that's one less.
You certainly see it. I mean, just at an event like this, and you go to a cocktail party, and there are very few women there. I mean, you can just see all the work coats.
Right. But, there's a luncheon on Wednesday, Women in Partner Luncheon, and in combination with the IIMCP Women in Technology.
They do a lot of work.
That's happening, yes. There were some awards given out last night, which is the first of that. And so there are people like Lindsay Zwart within the Microsoft community that are really championing that. And it's really great to see that somebody is really within Microsoft taking a hold of that and is running with it. So I'm really happy about that. And I'm going to support that 100%. Yeah,
I mean, when I think of what I've just observed at this year's event, like you said, I mean, I would have to agree with you that, probably was thought out to some degree that the presence of women in the keynote was so strong. And just in other sessions I've sat in on, and I'm going to sit on quite a few more, I think, focused on dynamics related topics. Presenters, if the main presenter wasn't a woman, at least when it came to Q&A, there were other women from Microsoft standing there ready to answer questions and be part of that sort of the face of represent the company on those things. So I didn't do the math on it, but it does seem like a better balance than you're seeing in the attendees, I guess.
Absolutely. And what's also interesting is, I don't have a technical background.
Right.
I didn't have a degree in computer science. I'm an accountant, and I ended up running a very technical firm in the end. Obviously, I didn't understand all the bells and whistles of my team, but that's where you empower your people you trust them. My engineers were fabulous, and I'd ask the questions and they would answer it, and I'd have some visions and I say, "Can you do this?" And they're like, "Yeah, we can do that." And I'm like, "Great, show me." And they would. They were fabulous in what they were able to accomplish. And so I don't really think you or anybody, man or woman, really needs to have a complete degree, but it certainly helps. But it shouldn't be considered a detriment to taking on a leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always something to be said. If everyone knows, the ins and outs of networking, you're not necessarily going to find someone to make those leadership decisions.
Exactly.
In the same way that someone who just is focused on vision and strategy, right?
Exactly.
So that totally makes sense. So any other expectations for this week, or things that you're particularly interested to observe, to hear from Microsoft, from your
Well, there's, as you know, been a lot of change in the air, probably more so this year than previous years. You always come to expect a reorganization, and it just seems like this one is maybe taking a little bit more time to bake. I've I'm sure it's all going to be great, and the people who are leading the partners will be brought forward, and we'll know who the partners can go to for questions and answers. It's still a little confusing right now. I think all the partners are trying to decide who's still here and who's gone.
I think people are getting a little annoyed because they can't. Microsoft's telling people they can't get the answers they need just because people are changing roles. It seems to be not sure who to put in front of the partners who are here sometimes, which is causing some frustration. Especially after talking to some partners from Europe, and it's like we came
all this
4,000 miles and spent all this money, and now we're not getting the answers we wanted from the Microsoft representatives we were hoping to hear from, which is I can certainly understand their frustration.
Absolutely, but
but it's a complex change. I mean, the reorganization is like you said, it's
very complex.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't completely understand it, honestly.
Yeah,
I'm still trying to ferret through what everything means.
There's that low level, the individual level, with people that partners knew who they're looking for to talk to, who either have changed roles or have left the company, and then there's the macro side of what is this actually doing to the sales organization or to the partner organization at Microsoft. I don't think anyone's 100% sure yet.
No, but I did really like the announcement about Microsoft 365. And I'm just wondering, all these 365s, so people are going to get confused at which 365 we're talking about. But I like the concept of the Windows 10 and the security and all that. I thought that was very, very well thought out. I'm assuming it's just another SKU or it's a upsell to the Office SKU. I don't get into the logistics of that, but that seemed like a really good idea. I really liked that, and I was very encouraged to see that.
Yeah, it seems to come off well. I think the business side of it, the SMB offering is sort of the net new part of it. I think and again, this isn't my strong suit either, but that's my understanding is that's really where the updates are is consolidating capabilities on the business side so that mobile device management is streamlined with Office 365 management, right?
Right. That's what I took from it as well.
Yeah. And I think I can understand some of the high level points that they were making about a lot of it has the mark of Ron Huddleston on it. In terms of some of the things that he has indicated that coming into the company from Salesforce, right, that he didn't like about the way Microsoft was organized in its sales practices that didn't make sense to him, I think, coming from the outside. So I think that seems to be where a lot of the changes
and it's interesting that one individual can make that much of a change in this organization. I mean, it's interesting. We'll see. We've seen it go around so many times. First you're being managed this way, and then you're being managed that way. And if you've been in this channel for 20 years, like I have, it seems like fashion. It comes back again. So a different name, but we'll see what happens here. But you come to expect it. It's just part of Microsoft. Every July, June, July, you can expect a reorg, and this is a big one, of course, and we'll see how it pans out. But there have been bigger ones in the past as well, and time will tell, as it always does.
Yeah, absolutely, and with your now that you're not actually a partner anymore, maybe you can look at it from the outside with a little different perspective. So, well, I look forward to sort of seeing what you continue to write on the topic. We'll obviously keep an eye on the book. We'll have to have you back when that comes out. I'm sure that'll spark a lot more questions and conversations. And have a great rest of the event. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
All right, Jason, you too. It's great, as always.
This has been the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Linda Rose for joining me today. Let us know what you think of the podcast. You can reach me directly at jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.